So, in my previous video, I talked about how Fabula Ultima is a game in which it promotes team play, and I do agree with that. It is very nice whenever players can cooperate, and that all the classes are, by comparison of 5th edition, weaker, and that is on purpose in order to facilitate the combos and the meshing of different classes together in order to get a certain class concept. And that not all classes, like not the classes in Fabula are not meant to be this catch-all of these are who you want to play if you're playing a healer. Like, there's no cleric that you have to play if you're playing a healer, because cleric is the best at healing. There's no class like that. There's a spiritualist, and they are good at healing, but they are not... They do have the heal spell, which is the best spell, but you can get that by other means without taking it. Well, you can't. You don't have to take the spiritualist class. You can get it through other means. But regardless, there is not a lot. There is no catch-all classes, except there are 3 that I do disagree with the direction that it went, and I think it was because it was a early build, or at least an early way to get the product out there. I'm not saying that Emma, the creator of the game, was lazy and they didn't have any other ideas or didn't think about anything else and didn't want to put in any more effort. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this was very clearly an early design decision, and as the game has gone on, the balance of the game has now gotten to a point where default options like the classes I'm about to mention have become almost required based on the generic abilities that were given to it for the sake of it being generic. And those classes, I think, are the Fury, the Weaponmaster, and the Sharpshooter. Now, the Fury is a little bit is different. It is different than the Weaponmaster and the Sharpshooter. But I lumped in the Fury because the Fury is meant to encompass the entire aspect of basically the undying, immortal melee combatant. So think your barbarians, and it encompasses the hand-to-hand aspect, as it gets bonuses and effects based on if you're using an unarmed strike or other types of weapons in the game. And so it's also meant to encompass the monk. And I think that was a fine, like, some of the abilities for the Fury were a fine decision to make in with the thought process of it being a barbarian, but lumping monk into it felt weird, and it doesn't feel like there's really a good martial artist style of class in the game without mixing and matching classes that thematically don't make a lot of sense. Like, currently, if I'm not mistaken, the best build for a unarmed strike user is the mutant, which is a class that uses body parts of different creatures to enhance certain aspects of their appearance and abilities, and one of them happens to be really good at unarmed strikes. And so it kind of lacks, like, Fury lacks an identity in terms of, yes, it is a barbarian monk hybrid class, but it feels like to me it goes against the concept of Fabula, where each class is not meant to be contained in and of itself a lot of aspects. It's meant to be its own thematic thing, and Fury feels as if it was an early design decision because it encompasses both a raging barbarian style of play and a martial artist monk style of play. And again, it feels like an early design decision because every other class is unique and different and doesn't have these aspects to it that make you think, oh, this is exactly the same as these 2 classes I'm familiar with. You think, wow, this is a wholly unique class. Now, the 2 that I think are the most guilty of this are the Weaponmaster and the Sharpshooter, and that's because if you look at Fabula Ultima, all these classes look unique and different, like I stated. But once you get to both Weaponmaster and Sharpshooter, you'll notice something odd. Both classes have an ability. Specifically, each of them, both of these classes have 3 abilities that are the exact same between the 3 of them. So between the 2 classes, these 3 skills of both classes are the exact same, but changed between martial or melee weapons and ranged weapons. They both have an ability that allows them to gain multi-attack on their weapon of choice, respectively. So ranged for Sharpshooter and melee for Weaponmaster. There's also a damage or accuracy bonus. I can't exactly remember which one. I know it's a bonus equal to your skill level for all weapons of either the ranged or melee type. And then there's another one that is sort of different and unique to both of them, but they are formatted and worded pretty similarly, where when an event happens, you are able to spend MP in order to do something, and they are formatted the exact same way. They both require their respective weapon, they both cost the same amount of MP, and they both do something to the enemy that harms them in some way. And I believe it's Breach for the Weaponmaster and Hawkeye or something like that, where it basically shoots a projectile out of the air. And then the other 2 abilities are somewhat unique. But these classes have become the de facto option in a lot of late game builds that I've seen, where if you're using a particular weapon and that weapon is your primary way of dealing any sort of damage, then it is all but a requirement to take it. Because you get so many generically strong benefits for taking the class that you would, in terms of an optimization standpoint, you would be an idiot not to take it. Like, yes, there are obviously instances in which there are better combos to take for certain things, but if you need just a generic boost to your overall, trying to think of the word, the effectiveness of your build, you take one of these classes. And I think that's a shame, because there's a lot of wiggle room that you can have where you don't have to have these 3 classes that are given generic benefits that apply to everything, when you can easily have 3 other classes that are more unique and they invoke a certain type of theme with them, versus I'm just a guy who's really good with melee weapons, or I'm just a guy with really good ranged weapons. And these types of classes, in particular the Weaponmaster and Sharpshooter, not so much Fury, but I'm still lumping it in here, but again, it is not as bad as the other 2, but it is still, in my opinion, bad in that design aspect. It's still a good class. All these 3 classes, I will say this right now, all 3 of these classes are still good classes. They're still good, but I think the way it was designed is not in line with what was later produced. And I think that these classes in particular are the exact reason why people in 5e, especially in the optimization community, hate the fighter so much. They hate the fighter, and they hate the martial side of the ranger, because that's all they are. The fighter is only good at weapons. The ranger's martial side is worse in comparison to its spell list, and that's why they don't get used that much. Ranger really only casts the good spells and then attacks when it's convenient, and fighter, you really don't want to go full levels into fighter unless you're taking Battle Master, or you're dipping into it for action surge to make it so that you can cast more than one spell a turn. So the fact that the fighter and the ranger in 5e are generic enough to be taken and used and are considered boring in their martial aspects because they're so generic makes me think that the Sharpshooter and the Weaponmaster are following the same trend, where they have generic fightermen, like generic Fighterson the Third, where all you know how to do is use a weapon, and that's your entire identity as a class. Now again, with the multi-classing aspect, it's not as bad, but I think if there was more separation between the Weaponmaster and its themes, and the Sharpshooter and their themes, and the Fury and their themes, and there were separate classes to depict certain aspects of what they were trying to go for with these three classes, instead of just lumping them into these three, it might result in a lot more classes and a lot more weird conflictions with certain skills and abilities. But I think the game would be better for it because your character identity could be more honed in, as is for a lot of the others, where their identity seems to be a lot more honed in and a lot easier to define, instead of just being guy who fights well with swords or melee weapons and guy who fights well with ranged weapons, or a guy who's really good at punching things and not dying. I'd say Guardian also has this problem, but it's kind of the generic tank ability, so at least it's separated in that front.